Late afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the 45th floor office in downtown Chicago, casting long shadows on the sleek mahogany floors. Outside, the city moved on as it always did. The clatter of trains, honking taxis, hurried footsteps of strangers chasing something. But inside the glass fortress of Adams Innovations, time felt like it had stopped. Michael Adams, once hailed as a tech visionary, sat motionless in a leather chair that had cradled countless hours of triumph. He was only 42, but the weariness etched into the lines around his eyes made him look older. His shoulders, once held high with pride, now slouched under the weight of silence. Across from him sat his longtime legal advisor, Harold Burns, silver-haired and solemn, clutching a thick folder like it contained a death sentence. And perhaps it did. "We've explored every angle," Harold finally said, voice gravelly with hesitation. "We're out of options, Michael." Michael didn't respond. His eyes were locked on the skyline, unfocused. Only days ago, he'd been in San Francisco, pitching Novacore, his company's revolutionary software platform, to a panel of investors. The pitch had failed. Not quietly, but spectacularly, and publicly. What was meant to be the next big leap for his company became the crack in the dam. The fallout was immediate. Investors fled like birds sensing an oncoming storm. Strategic partners retracted. Debt collectors circled. And now, the company he had built from a cluttered garage with 2 friends and a borrowed laptop stood on the brink of collapse. What haunted Michael most wasn't just the failure, but the nagging feeling that it hadn't all been an accident. He turned slowly, his voice hoarse from sleepless nights. "Is there any chance of restructuring the debt? A bridge loan? Maybe a venture group willing to take a gamble?" Harold shook his head. "Your credibility's shot, Michael. Novacore was the company's heart. Without it, you're just another tech firm bleeding cash." And the audits from last quarter, they raised a few flags. Nothing conclusive, but enough to make every door close just a little faster. Michael leaned forward, elbows on knees, pressing his hands against his temples. The very name, Novacore, felt like a cruel joke now. It had consumed years of his life, millions in R&D, and every ounce of trust from shareholders. And it had failed. Or maybe, it had been sabotaged. He couldn't prove it. But something about the numbers didn't add up. He'd been gone too much traveling, speaking at conferences, managing deals. Meanwhile, Thomas Blake, his deputy CEO and longtime friend, had handled operations. Blake had always seemed capable, even brilliant. But lately, something about him felt off. Overconfident. Too polished, like a man rehearsing for a curtain call. And yet, what choice did Michael have but to trust him? After all, Thomas was there from the start. He had vouched for the dismissal of Sarah Monroe, one of their best financial officers, during a controversy 2 years back. Michael hadn't looked too deeply then. He was busy, distracted, and Thomas had assured him it was the right call. Now, in this vacuum of silence and falling stock prices, those decisions clawed their way back. Michael stood and paced to the window. Below, the city sparkled like it always had. It didn't care who failed. He rested his forehead against the glass, watching people cross intersections like pieces on a board. Everyone had somewhere to be, something to build, someone waiting. At home, but he had no one tonight. He could go back to his penthouse, empty, cold, untouched for days, or sit here and let the world watch him unravel. Instead, he picked up his coat and walked out, telling Harold he needed some air. The elevator ride felt like a descent into the unknown, not just physically, but spiritually. He had never felt this alone in his life. He didn't take the town car waiting outside. He walked, without destination, past the silent lobbies of closed banks, the glowing signs of late-night pharmacies, and into Grant Park, a pocket of green clinging to the edge of the city's steel heart. It was quiet there. Birds rustled overhead. A few joggers passed. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed. And for a fleeting moment, Michael was not a CEO or a failure. He was just a man with his hands in his pockets, looking for something he couldn't name. And just when the silence started to feel too heavy to final, a voice pierced through. "Sir, would you like to buy a newspaper?" Michael turned. A boy, maybe 10 or 11, stood with a stack of papers under his arm. His jacket was too big. His sneakers were worn. But his eyes, they were alert, bright, kind. The kind of eyes that notice things. Michael blinked. The boy reminded him of himself years ago, selling old parts from broken radios to pay for his first computer. He reached for his wallet, grateful for the distraction. grateful to be reminded that not all things were lost. He handed the boy a crisp $20 bill. "Keep the change." The boy stared at the bill and hesitated. "That's too much, sir. I don't have change for that." Michael smiled faintly. "That's all right. Just take it." The boy took the money and handed him the paper. But something in his face shifted. He squinted, tilted his head. Then, his eyes widened as he looked down at the front page. There was a photo. Michael Adams. "Declines to comment after Novacore collapse." You're Mr. Adams," the boy said softly, "aren't you, from the tech company?" Michael's smile faded, but he nodded. "Yeah, that's me." The boy hesitated, clutching his papers tighter. Then, as if summoning courage from someplace small but mighty, he stepped closer. "I think I know what's wrong with your company," he said, voice low. "I think I know who messed things up." Michael blinked, stunned. "What?" The boy nodded solemnly. "I think I can help." In that moment, absurd, impossible, irrational, something flickered in Michael's chest, a thread of hope, a reason to keep walking forward. And that's when the story truly began. The park was quiet, wrapped in the amber hush of early evening. Grant Park in downtown Chicago wasn't just a place of green, it was a refuge. In the distance, city lights were starting to flicker awake. But here, beneath the arms of an old elm tree, the world felt slower, gentler. Michael Adams sat on a weather-worn bench near the fountain, the folded newspaper still in his lap. His mind had been a battlefield of figures and regrets for weeks, but now, for a few brief moments, he was simply still. He watched the pigeons dance for crumbs, an elderly couple walking hand in hand, a young father chasing his toddler across the grass. Life continued, even when yours had come undone. He let out a long, quiet sigh. The silence around him felt like a conversation with his younger self. The ambitious dreamer, who once believed he could build a future just by believing in it hard enough. Then, the boy spoke again. "I'm serious, Mr. I think I know what's going on in your company." Michael blinked and looked down at the boy. The kid hadn't left. "What's your name?" Michael asked, curious now, more than amused. "Eli," the boy said. "Eli Monroe." Monroe. The name landed like a stone. In a still pond, something stirred in Michael's memory. He turned slightly to look at the boy more closely. There was a spark in those eyes. Not just curiosity or awareness, the kind of gaze that came from paying attention, from seeing things most adults dismissed. "You said, you think you know who messed things up at my company," Michael said slowly. "Why would you say that?" Eli shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His grip tightened around the stack of papers. "Because I heard my mom talking. A lot. Late at night. She doesn't know I was listening, but I was. She used to work at your company. You probably don't remember her." Michael sat up straighter. His heart picked up a little. "What's your mom's name?" Sarah, Mandra Michael's breath. "Caught, of course. Sarah Monroe." A name buried 2 years deep under a pile of reports, damage control memos, and corporate silences. She had been the head of finance, sharp, efficient, one of the few who actually dared to question. He hadn't thought of her in a long time, not since she left under a cloud of suspicion stirred up by his deputy CEO, Thomas Blake. Back then, Thomas had approached him with documents supposed inconsistencies in financial reports. There were whispers of internal audit concerns, claims that Sarah was hiding something. Michael had been in Tokyo at the time, neck-deep in a billion-dollar partnership negotiation. Thomas insisted the matter be handled quickly and quietly. "She's not the right fit anymore," Thomas had said. "Let's cut the cord before it unravels the whole company." And Michael, too distracted, too trusting, had agreed. Sarah had left the company quietly. No questions. No confrontation. Just gone. Now, her son stood in front of him, holding a truth Michael wasn't sure he was ready for. "She cried a lot," Eli said suddenly, breaking the silence. "After she lost the job, she didn't say much to me, but I heard her on the phone with my grandma. She kept saying she didn't do anything wrong, that someone set her up, that she saw things she shouldn't have seen. About Mr. Blake." Michael's eyes locked with Eli's. The boy's voice trembled, but his words were steady. "Too grown up for his age. She said she was afraid that no one would believe her, and they didn't. You didn't." Michael lowered his gaze. Shame burned behind his eyes. A child had just reminded him of something he hadn't dared to admit, that somewhere deep down, he had always wondered if he'd been too quick to act, too willing to believe what was convenient. Eli continued, now almost whispering. "Since then, it's been tough. Mom works 3 jobs. She doesn't talk much. I help out by selling these after school. But I keep hearing her talk about you, about your company. And lately, she's worried again. She thinks Mr. Blake is doing something bad. Again, Michael's thoughts swirled. Was it possible? Could Blake, the man he'd trusted, promoted, defended, have orchestrated everything? Sarah's exit, Novacor's failure, the investor flight. His fingers clenched around the newspaper. And you, why are you telling me this? He asked quietly. Why now? Eli looked down at his sneakers, then back up. Because I think you're a good person who made a bad mistake. And if my mom's right, people could get hurt. More people. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the pages of the newspaper. On Michael's lap, for a moment, he didn't speak. Then, without thinking, he reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. Eli, can I talk to your mother? The boy hesitated, then nodded, and recited a phone number from memory. As Michael typed it in, something shifted inside him. A quiet determination. This was no longer just about saving a company. It was about righting a wrong one that had cost an innocent woman her reputation, and nearly cost a child his future. The park around them faded into the background. In its place stood the first flickers of truth, and the long road it would demand of him. He pressed save on the contact, then looked at Eli one last time. You did the right thing, Eli, I won't forget it. The boy smiled, just a little, then turned and disappeared into the evening. Michael remained seated, the number glowing on his screen. He hovered over the green call button, heart pounding like he was back at square one. And then, with a deep breath, he pressed it, ready to face whatever voice answered on the other end. The phone rang 3 times before a voice answered. It was calm, controlled, but distant. Hello. Michael froze for a heartbeat. The familiarity of it pulled something old and unresolved from deep inside him. There was no warmth in her tone, no surprise. Just the kind of careful politeness people reserve for numbers they don't recognize, but don't want to hang up on too quickly. Hi, Sarah. It's Michael. Michael Adams. A pause. Not long, but long enough. Then her voice returned. Clipped. Steady. Well, I didn't expect a call from the CEO of Adams Innovations. Is this about the company? Or are you calling just to test how far irony can stretch? He almost smiled, but not from amusement. From guilt. That was Sarah Monroe. Brilliant, sharp, honest to the point of discomfort. And now, understandably, bitter. No, he said softly. It's not a test. It's complicated, but I need to speak with you, face to face. Please. Another silence. Michael could almost hear the calculations running in her mind. The clock of her heart ticking through old memories. Betrayal had a way of making even a short conversation feel like opening a wound. Why? She asked finally. Why now? Michael exhaled, trying to put 2 years of regret into a single answer. I think I made a terrible mistake, Sarah, and it might have cost more than I ever realized. I need to understand what happened back then. I think it's connected to what's happening now. On the other end, there was no response. Just breath then. Slowly, she said. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock, Caf Baudry, on Jackson Boulevard. You know it. Yes, Michael replied quickly. Thank you. The line went dead. He sat there for a moment longer, staring at the phone, his thoughts in freefall. The name Sarah Monroe was no longer just a headline in an HR report from 2 years ago. It was now tied to a 10-year-old boy in a park with 2 old eyes, and the courage to speak truth. That night, Michael didn't sleep much. He thought about the day she left. It had been quiet, almost surgical. There was no outburst, no plea, just a short meeting. A few words about integrity concerns and ordered red flags. And Sarah had walked out of the building she helped shape without turning back. She carried a cardboard box, a framed photo, a mug with the company logo, the same one she used to sip black coffee at morning briefings. Michael remembered that image now, far clearer than he had in years. She hadn't even cried. She had just ... left. But he also remembered something else. How Thomas Blake had come to his office. Urgency in his voice. She's a liability, Thomas had said. Something's off in the financials she's overseeing. I don't want to make a scene, but we have to act fast. Quietly. Michael, neck deep in an overseas acquisition deal, had nodded. Thomas had always been the closer, the one who handled things, and Sarah, for all her brilliance, had a tendency to ask questions, push boundaries, doubt the numbers when no one wanted her to. Back then, Michael had seen it as a nuisance. Now, he saw it for what it truly was, integrity. The next morning, The cafe was warm with the scent of roasted beans and quiet conversation. Wooden chairs, brick walls, old jazz humming low in the background. It was the kind of place where people went when they needed a moment to breathe. Michael arrived early. He chose a corner seat near the window, where he could see the street. He didn't touch his coffee, he just waited. At 9:59, the bell above the door chimed. Sarah walked in, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. Time hadn't aged her much, but something had hardened, like someone who had learned not to expect apologies. Her dark hair was tied neatly behind her head. She wore no makeup. She didn't need any. Their eyes met. Michael stood quickly. Sarah, thank you for coming. She sat down slowly. Let's not waste time, Michael. You said this was important. He nodded. It is. He hesitated, then leaned forward. His voice quiet but firm. I need to know what really happened. With you, with the books, with Blake. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Her gaze was not angry, just tired. Like a woman who had carried the weight of a truth no one believed. You really want to know now, she said. 2 years later, after I lost my career, my income, after my son had to sell newspapers in a park to help us make ends meet. I didn't know, Michael said. I'm not asking you to forgive me. Just tell me. She stared at him and then something changed. Maybe it was Eli's name. Maybe it was the sincerity in Michael's voice. Maybe she was tired of silence. She began to speak, and with every word, the past began to crack open. Piece by piece, the story wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The cafe, a slow hum, faded into the background as Sarah began to speak. Her voice was steady, but her words cut like glass, precise, reflective, and unmistakably true. She didn't dramatize. She didn't need to. She recounted the weeks leading up to her dismissal at Adams Innovations. How she had started to notice inconsistencies, small at first, almost easy to dismiss. Duplicate invoices. Vendor payments that didn't match service logs. Contracts signed in haste, lacking supporting documentation. And all of them traced back to Thomas Blake. She had flagged the discrepancies in her internal reports. Quietly, professionally. At first, she thought it might be an oversight. But the deeper she looked, the more deliberate it seemed. When she confronted Blake, he brushed her off. Then, within days, she was being investigated for negligence. The irony wasn't lost on her then, and it certainly wasn't now. I thought you'd ask, she said, meeting Michael's eyes. That you'd come to me. But you didn't. You trusted him. Michael's throat tightened. I trusted the wrong person. She nodded, but said nothing. She didn't need to. The damage had already been done. Michael leaned forward, choosing his words carefully. I think Blake is behind what's happening now. The collapse of Novacor. The missing funds. It all fits. He had access to everything. And I was too distracted. Too blind to see it. Sarah looked away for a moment. Her fingers traced the rim of her tea mug. The silence between them filled with memories too heavy to unpack in one morning. I know this is a lot, Michael continued. And I don't expect anything from you. But I need your help. Not for me. For the company. For the people still working there. For the truth. She studied him. Not just his words, but his face, his tone, his regret. Finally, she asked, what exactly do you want from me? Access, he said. I want you to review the financial systems. Quietly, remotely. I can get you into the back and everything from the last 2 years. I need a second pair of eyes. Someone I can trust. Trust, she repeated. The word hung between them like a fragile bridge. Michael nodded. Yes. I know I didn't earn that. But maybe this is where I start trying to. Sarah didn't answer right away. She sat back, arms crossed lightly over her chest. Her posture was still, but behind her eyes, Michael could see the wheels turning. This wasn't just about an audit. It was about integrity. About setting the record straight. About giving her the voice she had been denied. And maybe, just maybe, it was about something deeper. Not revenge, but restoration. For her son. For the part of herself she'd left behind in that office 2 years ago. After a long pause, she said, all right, but on my terms. Michael nodded quickly. Anything. First, I get full access. No gatekeeping. No interference. Done. Second, this stays between us. No one else knows. Not your board. Not your IT department. No one. I can arrange that. Third, she said, eyes narrowing slightly. You don't get to tell me how to do this. I find what I find. I follow the numbers. If it leads to Blake or to you, I won't shield anyone. Michael swallowed hard. Understood. She looked at him a moment longer, then pushed her chair back slowly. She stood, gathered her coat, and offered only one final line before walking out. "I'll let you know what I find." As the door closed behind her, Michael sat in silence. It wasn't relief he felt. Not yet. But something shifted. A current had changed. Sarah was back. And this time she wasn't alone. Later that night, under the dim light of his home office, Michael opened a secured access panel and typed in the override codes that would give Sarah everything she needed. Every ledger, every approval log, every project record. It was all there. The company's living, breathing skeleton of numbers and trails. And if anyone could bring clarity to the chaos, it was her. Across the city, Sarah sat at a second-hand desk in a modest apartment. Eli had gone to bed, his breath even and soft behind a cracked door. She opened her laptop, pulled her hair into a loose bun, and stared into the screen. A storm of data stretched before her. This wasn't just business. It was personal. And it had only just begun. Night after night, while the rest of Chicago slept, two people worked in silence on opposite ends of the city. One in a quiet apartment, with a chipped coffee table and a sleeping child in the next room. The other in a high-rise office, once buzzing with energy, now dimly lit, echoing with questions left unanswered. Their alliance wasn't announced, formalized, or even spoken aloud, but it was real. And it was beginning to shake the ground beneath Adam's innovations. Sarah Monroe sat at her desk, hair tied back, sleeves rolled up. She hadn't worn a suit in 2 years, but her mind moved with the sharpness of someone who had never stopped calculating. On her screen, a sea of spreadsheets, approval logs, vendor contracts, and internal memos scrolled past her eyes like chapters in a crime novel, waiting to be solved. She started with Project Novacore, the supposed heart of Michael's company. Now the cause of its hemorrhaging. The numbers didn't scream. They whispered quietly, intelligently. Someone had gone to great lengths to make sure every misstep looked like a coincidence. But Sarah knew where to look, because she had helped build the very system they were now trying to manipulate. She cross-referenced contractor invoices with delivery receipts. She checked timestamps against internal communications. She even dug into metadata attached to digital signatures. And then she saw it. The first red flag came from a vendor. TechBridge Solutions. The company was listed as a preferred supplier of server components. Yet the address on their invoices traced back to a shared mailbox in Omaha. No website, no phone line. Just a P.O. box and 6-figure payments processed over 6 months. Sarah's eyes narrowed. She searched the vendor registry again. 3 other companies popped up. All partners on Novacore. All relatively new. All linked to the same legal firm in Delaware, known for setting up anonymous shell corporations. She mapped it out. The flow of money moved like a well-orchestrated dance, looping through intermediaries, small consulting firms, and advisory groups that never seemed to do much of anything. Funds vanished into thin air, disguised as technical support, licensing fees, and data integration services. It was fraught, deep, layered, and deliberate. And it all circled back to one name. Thomas Blake. His digital signature appeared on dozens of approval logs, sometimes using Michael's credentials, sometimes his own. But the dates and times didn't match. Several authorizations occurred during hours when Michael was overseas, or leading company-wide meetings. Either Thomas had forged access, or someone in it had handed him the keys. Sarah documented everything, every transaction, every anomaly. She built a file so detailed it could silence any defense. But she didn't stop there. She wanted context, motives. So she began searching through Blake's calendar logs and external communication reports. There, she found more private meetings with executives from Altera Capital, a rival investment firm known for aggressive tech acquisitions, lavish expense accounts, properties purchased in quiet suburbs under aliases connected to one of the fake vendors. Back at headquarters, Michael received Sarah's encrypted summaries with mounting disbelief. He read through every chart, every footnote, every line of damning evidence, and with each scroll, a bitter truth cemented. The man he had called his right hand had been slowly carving out the company's core for years, while smiling across the table in his gut. He had always felt something was wrong. But guilt, distraction, and blind trust had made him too slow to act. Not anymore. They kept communication minimal. No calls. No emails. Only a secure messaging platform built by one of Michael's few remaining trusted engineers. Every word typed was deliberate. Every file transferred was encrypted and saved twice. Once on a drive in Michael's office, once in a fireproof box under Sarah's bed. There were no late-night phone calls filled with panic or anger. No melodrama. Just the methodical pursuit of truth, and a quiet, growing respect between two people who had once been on opposite sides of an ugly decision. Michael began to change. He spent less time trying to convince investors, and more time learning what had gone wrong on his watch. He reopened old project logs. He started taking meetings with junior staff, asking questions he used to think were beneath him. People noticed. They saw a different Michael, not the distant executive, but a man trying to understand, to fix, to rebuild. Meanwhile, Sarah kept digging. She traced the timeline of Novacore's failure and compared it with key approvals signed by Thomas. She discovered that several critical bugs reported internally had been suppressed, never passed on to engineers or QA testers. Someone had wanted Novacore to fail, or at least to appear UNSALVAGEABLE. And beneath it all was a subtle sabotage. Missed deadlines, poor vendor choices, shifting documentation. Michael didn't sleep much those weeks. But every time his phone lit up with a new file from Sarah, he felt something stronger than exhaustion. He felt fire. This wasn't just a corporate clean dash-up. It was a reckoning. He stared out his office window. One night, holding the printed log of forged signatures in his hand. Below him, the city lights flickered as if waiting for him to decide. Justice, after all, required action. Not just truth. Tomorrow, it would be time to confront Thomas Blake. But tonight, the silent alliance held firm. A man reclaiming his integrity, and a woman reclaiming her voice. And the storm was just beginning to gather. The boardroom was unusually quiet that morning. It was the kind of stillness that settled just before a storm. The kind that made even the hum of the air conditioning feel too loud. Sunlight poured in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the long polished table where so many deals had once been signed. Partnerships, expansions, victories. But today, it would host something far different. Michael Adams stood at the head of the table. A thick manila folder in front of him. No PowerPoint. No advisors. Just the truth. Cold and heavy. His face was calm, but his jaw was tight. His breath, measured, the weight of betrayal sat in his chest like stone. Across from him, Thomas Blake strolled in, phone in hand. Still wearing that same confident smirk he always carried into meetings. He was dressed sharply, as always, charcoal suit, cufflinks, that sparkled just enough, tie knotted with surgical precision. "Morning, Michael," Thomas said, sliding into his seat like nothing in the world could touch him. "You wanted to see me?" Michael nodded. "Yes. Sit down." Thomas cocked an eyebrow. "Already am." There was a beat of silence. Then Michael slid the folder across the table. Thomas glanced down, then up again. His face didn't change. "What's this?" "Everything," Michael said. "Every falsified approval. Every shell company. Every redirected payment you signed off on using my credentials." Still, Thomas said nothing. He opened the folder, leafed through a few pages. Clean, itemized, undeniable. Then came a quiet chuckle. "Come on, Mike, this is what we're doing now. You bring me in here with a stack of conspiracy theories." Michael didn't flinch. "This isn't a theory. This is forensic accounting. Timestamped signatures, IP logs, vendor registrations cross-referenced with your personal investments." Thomas leaned back slowly, the smirk fading just enough to show the man underneath. The one who'd been careful for so long, but not careful enough. "You've been busy," he said. "Let me guess. Sarah Monroe." Michael didn't answer. Thomas sighed, folding his arms. "You know, I always liked her. Too bad she didn't know when to back off. You should have let it go, Mike. You really should have." There it was, the confession, wrapped in arrogance. Not spoken in fear, but entitlement. He had thought himself untouchable for so long. He didn't know how to speak any other way. Michael stepped forward. "You used this company as your personal ATM. You orchestrated the takedown of Novacore, so Altera Capital could buy us out for pennies on the dollar. You buried Sarah because she got too close, and you knew I was too distracted to question you." Thomas didn't deny it, not once. He just stared. And then he said something Michael would never forget. "You think this company runs on ideals. It runs on leverage. Always has. You were too sentimental to see that. That's why I had to clean up after you." Michael's voice dropped. "You didn't clean up. You burned it down." The room went still again. Then Michael reached into his pocket, pulled out a slim black device, and placed it gently on the table. A recording device. Thomas's eyes finally changed. Just slightly. A flicker of calculation, of panic trying not to show. Michael pressed play. Thomas's voice echoed back, clear, unambiguous, taken from their earlier conversation. The admission, the sarcasm, the smug confession. I always liked her. Too bad she didn't know when to back off. You should have let it go, Mike. Michael leaned in. This has already been archived, copied, shared with legal counsel, the board, and law enforcement. Thomas stood, the chair scraping back. You're bluffing. Michael shook his head slowly. I'm not, and you know it. Outside the glass walls, employees moved through the halls, unaware of the reckoning happening behind the doors. But inside, the air was charged. Thomas didn't say another word. He didn't need to. Security was already on its way, summoned minutes earlier. When they entered the room, he didn't protest. He straightened his tie, muttered something under his breath, and walked out like a man who still thought he could salvage his narrative. Michael didn't watch him leave. He stared at the chair Thomas had vacated, the echo of his betrayal still hanging in the room like smoke. Then he turned, picked up the folder, and walked to the window. The city stretched wide before him, unchanged. But everything inside that office had shifted. For the first time in 2 years, the air felt honest. The company hadn't been saved, not yet, but the cancer had been cut out. The rot-named man behind the mask revealed it, and now, finally, there was space to rebuild. But before that journey could begin, there was one more thing Michael had to do, not for business, not for strategy, but for something more important than either. He reached for his phone, found the message thread, and typed, "He's gone. Thank you, Sarah. Let's bring this company back together, the right way." He hit send. And with that, the final confrontation was over. But the redemption was only beginning. The first Monday after the storm felt different. Gone were the empty smiles and corporate jargon. Gone were the rushed meetings that masked deeper dysfunction. The office, still recovering from the seismic confrontation that ousted Thomas Blake, had taken on a quieter tone. Not broken, but honest. The kind of quiet that comes after someone finally says what no one dared to say. Michael Adams stepped into the main lobby of Adams Innovations. Not through the executive entrance, but through the front door. No entourage. No polished speech. Just him, suit a little wrinkled, tie loosened, and eyes clearer than they'd been in years. People turned, some whispered, others just watched. He didn't need to command attention. He simply walked with a presence that said, "I'm not hiding anymore." That morning, he called an all-hands meeting. The entire staff gathered in the atrium, a wide space lined with tall windows and faded banners from old product launches. No one knew what to expect, but they came. Engineers, marketers, janitors, receptionists, because deep down, they were waiting for someone to either bury the company or bring it back to life. Michael stood on the low platform and held the microphone for a long second before speaking. "I'm not going to stand here and pretend that last few months haven't been hard, or that I didn't make mistakes, some of them very costly." He paused. "But we can't rewrite the past. What we can do is own it, fix it, and build something better from it." There was no applause, not yet, just silence. "Listening, I let people down," he continued. "I trusted the wrong hands, and someone with no honor tried to hollow this company from the inside out. But the truth is out now, and that's the first step." He turned slightly, looking at the familiar faces, tired, hopeful, skeptical. "Today, we start again. Not with slogans or flashy campaigns, but with a promise to restore this company's heart." And then, he said something no one expected. "I've asked Sarah Monroe to return as Chief Strategy Officer." There was a ripple in the room, surprise, disbelief, then a smattering of nods from those who remembered her, respected her, even missed her. She saw what we couldn't, and when it would have been easy for her to walk away, she chose to come back, not for revenge, but for what's right. He stepped down after that. No fanfare, just a quiet sound of people clapping slowly at first, then louder. Not for the speech, but for the honesty. Sarah returned that week, not in heels and suits, but in quiet confidence. She moved through the halls, like someone returning to a home she never got to say goodbye to. She rebuilt trust one hallway conversation at a time, one clear spreadsheet, one difficult decision. Her presence didn't erase the past, but it began to shape a future worth believing in. Within months, the company's systems were overhauled, financial controls tightened, vendor relationships reevaluated. But more than that, the culture began to change. Junior engineers were invited into leadership meetings. The cafeteria reopened, with community lunches. No more executive lounges. With closed doors, departments that never used to speak now collaborated over shared goals instead of shared blame. And then came the call that no one expected. An independent firm, impressed by the company's transparency and recovery, offered a major partnership, not for Novacore, as it once was, but for a reimagined version, one that prioritized accessibility, user empathy, and long-term sustainability. The name remained, but everything beneath it had evolved. Sarah led the restructuring. Michael focused on mentorship, guiding the younger generation of innovators. And through it all, Eli, the boy who had sparked it, came by every Friday after school, no longer to sell newspapers, but to visit the people who had become family. One afternoon, in the break room now repainted and filled with plants and laughter, Eli stood next to a framed photograph on the wall. It showed the three of them, Michael, Sarah, and Eli, cutting the ribbon at the launch of Novacore Reborn. Below the photo was a plaque that read, "Truth isn't what breaks us, it's what sets us free." Years from now, when people told the story of how Adam's innovations came back from the brink, they didn't just talk about the scandal. They talked about the man who admitted he was wrong, the woman who refused to stay silent, and the boy who believed grown-ups could still do the right thing. Redemption didn't come with a parade. It came quietly through hard choices. Second chances, and the courage to start again. And that, more than any product or profit margin, became the company's greatest legacy.